She was the first. Her legs worked furiously in a useless effort to outrace the black machine. Then she felt the touch of its hot body against her bare skin, a savage caress that telegraphed the end of her young life. The next instant her flesh was tearing as she was scraped along between the car and the guardrail. As her eyes swept past the windshield, her dying brain recorded the sensory input of what she saw. It was only a brief glimpse through the murky depths of the amber glass, but her last recollection was one of unspeakable horror at the presence that had glared back at her. Chapter 1. The tentative first light of dawn pierced the darkness. The air was still, awaiting the breath of a new day. Jagged, thrusting peaks began to materialize in a shadow play of subtle definition. Stillboard sentinels keeping a blind watch on the slowly blanching night. Far below, nestled in a solitude of peaceful, dreamless sleep, a young man and woman lay side by side, each wrapped in the warm confines of a colorfully quilted sleeping bag. Pete, by nature an early riser, was the first to wake. He lay there, still in awe of the beauty that surrounded him, even though he spent the whole of his 19 years in its midst. Then he turned to his companion and brushed her cheek lightly with a kiss. Susie stirred gently and he kissed her again, her brown eyes open, staring at him through the hazy recognition of half-sleep. And then a contented smile spread across her pretty face. "Good morning," she said through a yawn. "Good morning yourself. Sleep good?" "Terrific. How about you?" "The best," he answered. "There's nothing quite like it, is there?" "Oh, I don't know," she said coyly. "A bed does have certain advantages." "Really? I thought we did pretty good without one last night." "Only pretty good?" "Well, thank you very much." She unzipped her bag and sat up, running her fingers through her flaxen hair. "Hey, you know what I meant. Do I? Will you stop that and give me a kiss?" She couldn't suppress a teasing laugh as she shifted quickly out of his reach and stood up. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Tactful, I think it's my turn to fix breakfast." "To hell with breakfast," he said as he struggled out of his bag and lunged for her. She jumped away and ran through the damp meadow grass, laughing as he chased her. Their joy was a natural counterpoint to the freshness of the morning, and as he caught up with her, the two of them tumbling to the earth in a twinning of tanned, healthy young bodies. She offered only a token flurry of resistance before submitting to the passion that overwhelmed them both. Hands fighting against buttons and zippers, their clothing was discarded in small explosions of khaki and plaid, and soon they were naked in each other's arms, lost in their mutual pleasure. Afterward, as they lay spent on the dew-covered grass, he propped himself up on an elbow and lazily traced the outline of her mouth with his finger. "I wish this weren't the end," he said. "It's been a beautiful 5 days." Susie kissed his finger. "There'll be others, all the time in the world." He grinned. "That's easy for you to say. Do you have any idea of what I had to go through to get away for this? My mother isn't exactly the most liberal person in the world, you know. It was worth it, wasn't it?" He kissed her hard on the mouth. "Susie, can I say something crazy?" "I wish you would," she whispered. "I think I love you. I mean, really love you." She reached up and pulled him against her, surprised to find him ready so quickly. Then she felt him sliding in. "Please," she said softly, "let's make it slow this time." And they did, lavishing each other with new sensations as if, for some inexplicable reason, this would be their last time together. Sunrise was perhaps an hour old. and the stoic grandeur of rugged mountains and swelling foothills dwarfed Pete and Susie as they cycled along a narrow asphalt highway. Its center line long ago faded to a ghostly streak. They rode side by side, bright yellow backpacks secured, their young bodies poised effortlessly on their sleek 10-speed bikes. Their firm, well-muscled legs moved in an easy rhythm. They'd been riding only a few minutes, remarking casually on the passing scenery, tranquil and content in the leisurely pace of their journey. An incline loomed in front of them, climbing to the top of a rock-studded cliff. "Race you to the top," Pete suddenly called across. "You're on." She flashed him a challenging smile, shifted gears, and jumped into a quick lead, the muscles tensing in the backs of her shapely thighs and straining against her snug-fit white shorts. Pete's response was pure reflex, a smooth performance of bike and rider as the drive chain slipped cleanly from one sprocket to another, and he brought his body almost parallel to the asphalt in an attempt to minimize any wind drag. As the hill grew steeper, beads of perspiration sprang out across their foreheads. But a simple change of gears kept their bikes going faster and faster. The road dropped off sharply to the right in a rocky cascade to the diminishing landscape below. With a quick glance over her shoulder, Susie saw Pete determinedly closing the gap between them, but their competition was overlaid by a strong sense of joy, and neither could contain their laughter as their eyes met. "You'll never make it," he yelled. "Says who?" She pumped faster, the cool morning air whipping past her face, the wind of her momentum lifting her hair from her shoulders. Pete marveled at her body, taut and uncompromising in her effort to win, and thought back to the dawn when she laid next to him, soft and supple after their bouts of lovemaking. He had a brief urge to let up, but he knew she'd be hurt at the concession, and he had to admit that there was a good chance he was going to lose no matter what he did. More than once during the past week she'd proven herself to be an excellent competitor. Yet somehow she always managed to retain her femininity. He liked that immensely, her combination of beauty and strength. She was bright and athletic, and she wasn't ashamed of being either. She accepted a challenge on its own terms and asked for no special favors. She was eager to please, but demanded pleasure in return. In short, she was one hell of a woman. And the knowledge that they belonged to each other, not by acquisition but by freedom of choice, filled him with pride. Nearing the crest of the hill, a good 200 feet above the spot where they began their climb, they each threw their bikes into the highest gear and bore down for the final big push to the top. Their breathing was labored, their bodies tensed with the challenge at hand. Pete's front wheel pulled up even with Susie's legs, and then, in a final burst of speed, he crested the top of the hill and let out a joyful victory yell, Susie pulling up beside him. "How the hell did you do that?" "Talent," he gloated. "Pure talent. And a lot of luck. Jealous? Never." The top of the hill was fairly level for 25 or 30 yards, and they came to a stop at the entrance to a mile-long tunnel to catch their breath. As they stood there, straddling their bikes and staring into the rock-hewn tube of darkness that stretched before them, they could read on each other's faces the identical thought. When they came out at the other end of that tunnel, it would be an easy, downhill ride into Santa Ynez, and the end of their idyllic trip. A sudden gust of wind flurried, kicking up some dust, and Susie broke the oppressive silence. "Hey, race you through the tunnel. Haven't had enough, huh?" Just as the two of them lurched into the blackness of the tunnel, The faint rumble of an engine nudged the early morning languor, but the impression barely registered with them. There was a race to be won, and that was all that commanded their attention. A mile and a half away, a car moved along the same road, its black bulk digesting the asphalt in a frenzy of forward progress. Riding the center lane, it sneaked quickly around hairpin turns with uncanny agility, as if it were alien to no road on Earth. As it rose into the mountains, the roar of its engine lacerated the post-dawn stillness. Inside the car, vacant silence reigned, underlined only by the smooth hum of a massive power plant. Otherwise, not the slightest sound could be heard, as the scenery rushed by like a silent film unreeling past amber, smoke-tinted windows. The dashboard of the car was devoid of all standard Detroit paraphernalia, with the exception of a thin red needle monitoring the pace of the machine on a horizontal slash of speedometer. The windshield, tinted amber like all the other glass, offered an eerie perspective of the fast-approaching world. Within the tunnel, the two cyclists hurtled onward, the light at the other end growing steadily brighter, the arching ribs of the supporting structure vaulting high above their heads. The hill that had tested the skills and endurance of Pete and Susie vanished beneath the wheels of the car, like so much meat passing into a grinder. In less than a minute it had topped the grade, its huge mass taking briefly into the air, then settling down again with the grace of a big cat. Pete and Susie shot out of the tunnel, racing downhill. To their right ran a stone guardrail. Beyond that, the road dropped off sharply into a deep chasm. On their left, giant red cliffs rose up into the clean morning air. The car entered the tunnel, single headlamps popping on, the spill of the illumination glancing off the highly polished maw of its vertical grille, like a capsule whisking through a pneumatic tube. The car hissed through the long rock passageway, the throb of its engine a steadily rising crescendo that trumpeted out toward the cyclist. As it broke into the sunlight, they glanced nervously over their shoulders at the scream of the approaching car. Still rendered invisible by the S-curves that laid behind them, they'd both done enough riding to be more than familiar with road jocks, and they edged a little closer to the stone guardrail, still pumping hard and waiting for the inevitable moment when the car would pass. Probably with its horn blaring or the idiot driver shouting some obscenity. Susie, about 5 yards behind Pete, was the first to detect a change in the engine's pitch as the car slowed dramatically. She looked back just in time to see it slide into view around a tight curve. Shocked at its menacing presence, she watched it leave its position over the center lane and pull in directly behind the two of them. Damn, she thought, he wants to play games, just what we need. More than a little apprehensive, she waved the car around with her left arm. Its response was to increase its speed and pull up to within 20 feet of her. Pete looked back. What the hell is he trying to do? Come on around, he yelled, and he waved the car by. It closed the gap to within 10 feet of Susie. Frightened, she shifted gears and bore down hard on the pedals of her bike. Again the car accelerated, having the distance between them. Pete saw what was happening, but there was nothing either of them could do. To their right was the guardrail and the drop of the cliff. To their left, the mountainside, and behind them, the car. The palms of Susie's hands began to sweat and slip along the black tape on her handlebars. Her mouth went dry with fear. She was traveling as fast as she could, and still the car dogged her from 5 feet away, the heat of its engine beating against her bare legs. Why doesn't he pass? Why doesn't he pass? The litany ran through her mind over and over again. Then, abruptly, the car moved to its left. Thank God, she thought. She felt its presence as it pulled alongside her rear wheel and forced herself not to turn and look, afraid that any reaction on her part might prompt the driver to some new game of madness. Gradually, her peripheral vision picked up the sparkling chrome of a double bumper and the hump of a rounded, inwardly canted front fender that jutted out beyond the headlights like the bulbous shoulders of a circus strongman. Move, damn you, move. The unspoken words rang loud and clear in her head. Skillfully, she maneuvered her rocketing bike even closer to the stone guardrail in an attempt to give the car as wide a berth as possible. Then, somehow, she sensed it was going to make another move, and for a moment she felt relief, but it was quickly shattered by the realization of what was about to happen. Peter. The name was wrenched from her throat in a shriek of fear. He turned, disbelief mingling with terror as he watched the cart creep to its right, forcing Susie over. Now she was only inches from the railing. Her legs worked furiously in a useless effort to outrace the black machine. Then she felt the touch of its hot body against her bare skin, a savage caress that telegraphed the end of her young life. The next instant her flesh was tearing as she was scraped along between the car and the guardrail. Her bicycle ripped in two by the grinding friction. She screamed once, a tortured plea for help, and Pete couldn't bring himself to turn and witness what he knew was happening. Seconds later, Susie's body was spun completely around by the action of the car. As her eyes swept past the windshield, her dying brain recorded what she saw. It was only a brief glimpse through the murky depths of the amber glass, but it was a glimpse at close range, and her last recollection was one of unspeakable horror at the presence that had glared back at her, burning its image into her clouding mind. Then her mangled corpse and the twisted remains of part of her bike plunged over the side, the railing having terminated a few feet before the beginning of a bridge. Pete leaned into his bike's momentum, his mind a paralyzed mass, frozen on the tableau of his impending death. The car drew up behind his rear wheel. The noise of the engine beating a furious tattoo in his ears, he felt the slightest impact as its bumper gently nudged his bike. He couldn't help it. He was ashamed, but tears rolled down his face. He just wanted it to be over. The car backed off slightly, then again contacted the rear of Pete's bike, his knuckles blanched white with the grip of his hands on the bars. He'd never considered his own death before, most certainly not in violent terms, and now it was upon him. In one quick, savage movement, the car leapt forward with coiled fury, its front bumper literally scooping up Pete and his fragile bike and flinging them off the bridge and into the chasm below. Pete's dying scream was lost on the rugged wilderness. The car hurtled on as if nothing had happened, leaving behind it 3 signposts of death, a ghastly crimson streak staining a section of the railing, a twisted portion of a bicycle, and a tattered piece of a plaid blouse. The evidence was there, waiting to be discovered, waiting for the fear to begin.